Leadership. One of the most important aspects of leadership is communication. And one of the most important aspects of communication is storytelling. That's why I'm so excited to mention the Stories with Traction course with you. In this course, you will learn how to be a great storyteller. I share concepts with you on how you can boost sales, enhance your internal communication and marketing, and create a vibrant company culture. If you're looking to build a story bank for your organization and utilize a framework to persuade more effectively, go check out the course in the show notes, the Stories with Traction course. Now, on to the podcast. Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. I'm so excited for this episode because this episode is going to outline a journey of different mistakes, different victories, reward, kind of behind the scenes, if you will, on how I went from point A to point B regarding LinkedIn, but also how my guest went from point A to point B regarding LinkedIn. I'm joined by Rachel Simon. Now, Rachel's been a part of this podcast for quite some time. We did 3 episodes earlier this year, the last one being in May. So we did one March, April, and May. So go check those out. I'll include them in the show notes. In March, we outlined stories on a massive stage. In April, we talked about refining your stories through LinkedIn. And then in May, are your stories resonating? Are they actually landing with your audience? I will include all those in the show notes. But we wanted to come back on, Rachel and myself, and really outline our journey from start to where we are now. So I'm excited to have Rachel back. Rachel Simon is the founder and CEO of Connect the Dots Digital, where she focuses on LinkedIn corporate strategy and how companies can utilize the platform with their employees for maximum results. Welcome back, Rachel.
Hi, Matt. It's so good to be back. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for your time. I appreciate it. I recognize, based on all the episodes that we did, that people love to learn from you and what you have to say. I can just see based on the sheer amount of downloads that your episodes bring in. So this is something that is on the forefront of people's minds for multiple reasons. One, I think a lot of people find it intriguing. They want to engage more with LinkedIn and utilize it as a business tool, but also there's a lot of confusion. So I think a lot of people listen in to kind of unpack elements of that confusion. Now, we've talked in the past about how LinkedIn has changed, how it transformed into a more of a glorified resume type platform into the social media platform and networking tool that it is today. But I want to dive deeper and kind of peel back the curtain, so to speak, and go behind the scenes to kind of share with everyone what we went through, our journey thus far when it comes to LinkedIn. So do you remember when you first started to engage and why that was the case?
Yeah, I joined begrudgingly in 2011 because I was working in my former role at the nonprofit where I used to work. And I had just started with them. I had encouraged them to let me run their social media strategy. And it was very much focused on Facebook at the time, kind of in 2010. I felt like there was a huge opportunity to share stories, to really build an audience community through social media because it was pretty new for all of us. And somebody was like, well, you should probably get on LinkedIn. And I'm going to guarantee that I said, I'm not looking for a job. Why do I need to be on LinkedIn? But I joined, and when I look back, because you can download all of your old content. So I went back and did that like a year ago, and my first couple of posts were just so terrible. They were embarrassing. but I was using it, I really wasn't using it. And, fast forward, I left that job in 2015, went into marketing consulting, had that client, got me really into LinkedIn. And it really was in 2018, 2019 that I started sharing content more regularly. And I actually took a course, joined a course in 2019 with a woman, Madeline Mann. If you're familiar with Madeline, she she had a program at the time called LinkedIn for Thought Leaders. And it really was a lot of the strategies that I was using on LinkedIn with my clients, but I needed that accountability for my own content strategy. And it really helped me start to develop and find a more engaging voice on the platform. And then the rest is kind of history from there, because I fell in love with it. It just got to be so fun because I started building these great relationships with people because I was sharing content and commenting on other people's content.
So what's really funny about that is I didn't even realize this when I asked that question to you, how close the years match up with our starting points. Okay. So you had mentioned 2010. For me, it was around that time as well. I think it was 2009. And I had a colleague at the time say, "Hey, I know you're into like motivational, inspirational stuff. Are you on LinkedIn?" And I was like, "No, I don't get my inspirational anything from LinkedIn." And I viewed it as a glorified resume, just like you at the time, right? I wasn't looking for a job. And then I just let it sit for years. And then for me, it was September of 2019, where I went to a workshop through the National Speakers Association. They were actually giving a workshop on how speakers can utilize LinkedIn. And I was like, this is amazing. I was like, I got to get on this. And then very much like you, what you said, I started posting for me, it was months, and I felt like my content was terrible. I felt like it was going into a black hole, didn't know if anyone was really paying any attention. And then from there, after the rep, started to figure it out. And so glad I did, because, a few months later, the world shut down due to COVID. All the networking events were shut. No one was doing networking events. And networking events in person were radically different than Zoom calls in many ways. So I wasn't getting the kind of networking that I had before. And turning to LinkedIn really saved a lot of elements of my marketing. So it supercharged my networking in a big, big way. I was able to connect with so many more people in a quicker manner and then see those results. So from a networking perspective, when you were engaging, did you see how it changed your ability to network?
Definitely. So, my goal at the time, my business was pretty new. So I incorporated Connect the Dots Digital in January of 2018. So I had been doing just like freelance marketing consulting from sort of the summer of 2015 until that time, and had worked on more and more with LinkedIn specifically, and was like, I'm going to go all in on this. Like, I see a lot of opportunity here. But there were a lot of big names who had pretty large followings in the LinkedIn trainer / coach / expert space. And, anybody who's started a business, every one of us has that imposter syndrome. Like, well, why would anyone take me seriously when all of these people have already been doing it and are more established than me? But I wanted to learn from them. I started following a lot of people. A woman, Brenda Meller, who's awesome, had at the time, she would put together something she called her LinkedIn Rockstar list. And so I went through her list, and I followed a lot of those individuals and started checking out their content, and I'd start to comment on their content and build relationships with those people. And it helped get me more visibility, along with starting to build my credibility in the space. So it just starts slowly. And today, a lot of those people that I started off just following because I wanted to learn from them are friends of mine, and where we collaborate, we, help each other out. We learn from one another still, but it's on a very equal basis versus me feeling like I have to, I'm not worthy, to quote like Wayne's World. I'm not worthy.
That's awesome. So I want to mention about you. You said it was slow, right? Like it was a slow process. And I cannot stress enough how agonizing it was for me to really engage when it came to LinkedIn. So I wish people could see me years ago on how stressful it was for me. So, and I'm interested to hear your perspective when you were first launching content. But for me, I remember, Rachel, I kid you not, I would read article after article after article, book after book after book, just like almost ripping my hair out to try to figure out if I read enough books, enough articles, maybe I too could create content that people would appreciate. And I literally, that was my process early on. I was going to post once a week. And I remember I had these stacks of articles, like when it came to like forms and business and world, like different news of different events. And I don't even remember all of the ones that I had, but I had articles on speaking and articles on, I had no idea what I was even doing, but I would read all these articles and I'd be like, oh, maybe I can write my perspective about A, B, and C. And it took so much time and research, and it was so agonizing to get one post a week. And then once that happened, I committed to posting every day, which was very challenging when I was first starting to do it. And I just wish people could see how agonizing it was for me personally. Did you find it really tough at first, or did it come like second nature right out of the gate for you?
I think it's hard no matter, I would be interested to know if anyone finds it like content creation just to be like easy breezy from the get-go, because it is very challenging. And my earlier content when I was first starting, similarly, I was like, I'll try to post once a week. And I think I was kind of, sharing articles and trying to put my spin on it. And again, that course I took is what really helped me figure out what to talk about. And one of the things I did while I was going through the modules was I still have this notebook. I took a notebook and I wrote out on a piece of paper profile. And I literally bulleted out every single component of a LinkedIn profile so that I would think about every piece, every bullet on that page is a potential post topic. Or, I could write a post about headline, profile photo, blah, 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 blah. So, and I did that for profile, for network, for content, for engagement, for all the components of a comprehensive LinkedIn strategy. So I had, 50 to 80 bulleted out ideas. And it's something that I recommend, like with my clients too, get as granular as possible, because it's just really hard to look at the blank page and be like, what should I talk about? But if you have these ideas of how you break down concepts within your business, it gives you a starting point. So that was really helpful. And honestly, right in line with, your sweet spot, starting to pepper in storytelling, bringing in some personal experience on things was another game changer when it came to content. It made content writing more fun, more creative, and a little bit easier of a lift. And, what's funny is, there's a lot of stuff I post on LinkedIn that like, I feel weird if I would share on Facebook, even though Facebook is my kind of more inner circle friends and family. But LinkedIn is the place where I share that kind of storytelling content.
Yeah, no, that's so good. So I want to unpack something that you said, Rachel, because I think it's so important. Okay, so first, it's almost like a game, so to speak. And what I mean by that is once I was posting, okay, so once I got in the routine, I started a little game where I thought about a subject and then everything that was in line with that subject. So like as an example, the first thing that pops in my head is a tree. Okay. So if we're going to think about a tree, what's everything that goes along with a tree? Okay. So you have roots, you might have soil, you have leaves, you might have a stump if the tree is cut down, you have growth, you have what are some other things? You would have bark,
The seasons,
the seasons, exactly. Maybe you would have
fruit.
fruit, you'd have some maybe some seeds. You would water it. So my whole point is, even with something as simplistic as tree, we could probably rattle off like 30 different things, right? And I think a lot of people, when it comes to their space, they say, well, what do I talk about? Well, there's so many subcategories to whatever industry someone's in. If they played a game they think about a tree, think of all the different things. All right, so if you're a sales rep and you're selling whatever it is, whatever widget it is, how many subcategories are within that widget category? So now you have all these different things. And then something that I learned from you, Rachel, was about those content buckets, right? Having certain buckets. And I feel that a lot of people find success within threes. So they have three specific things that they kind of rotate through. So you have that tree analogy of all these different things. You have 30. So do that for your industry and then cut it down to three. And then that's what you're going to focus on. So once I did that, it was so helpful, so helpful. So can you speak to some other ideas that people might be able to just get ideas for content creation?
I mean, I think that the way you broke that down is really, it's a great analogy of thinking about the big picture, then the sub pictures, and then what are the three priorities within that. And, what sometimes something I hear often is, oh, everyone knows this. Why would I don't need to talk about this, or I'm going to look so basic if I talk about whatever that, insert subject. But what we need to keep in mind is that just because something really, really well, your audience doesn't know it. And you don't know who's seeing your content. So, showing your expertise and talking about the basics of your industry can really help you be visible and seen as an expert in that field. You don't know who knows somebody who needs what you do. So I see this happen really too often. And usually what happens is one of two things. Either people don't want to post it because they feel like they're going to look, too elementary, or they go the opposite and they get so deep in like the lingo with lots of acronyms and lots of inside baseball language that they limit who can understand that content. So figuring out what you can talk about that is going to balance your expertise, but with an audience that can be a little bit broader, is really a great strategy. And the example I like to use is from one of my clients. Really smart. She was in like the kind of go-to-market, like product area. So she did a lot with product launching, and she had put this really good post together, and it was about sustainability, but it was filled with acronyms. And the feedback I gave her is like, this is such good content. There's so many people that care about buying products that, are responsible because we want to be, have sustainability. But when you use the acronyms, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm either going to feel stupid or I have to look it up, and I may or may not take the time to do a Google search to find out what this acronym stands for. So like avoiding that lingo and those acronyms or spelling them out. It's just a little example of how you can show your expertise, but then broaden your audience so that you're not excluding people who might want to engage with the topic that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about speaking. I was going to say to the masses, but the masses for their target audience, right? I think so. If it's someone within their target audience, I really like what you said about not being too elementary, but not being too detailed where people don't understand what you're talking about. I think that's a great way to look at it. Bringing our unique perspective to LinkedIn is huge, right? So from an executive perspective, if if a leader wants to really start branding who they are, think about all the stories that they can crank out when it comes to their kids or when it comes to even athletics or whatever the case may be. They could literally start having those content buckets that would be very relatable to the masses, so to speak, that they could be building out a following. And what is that going to do for them business wise? Well, you mentioned, I believe on the last episode we did together, how many people go to LinkedIn, they go to social media platforms, they go to a website to see different stories based on who the leader is. They literally do research on the CEO of that company. And you mentioned, I don't want to throw out numbers because I don't want to get them wrong, but you mentioned it's very, very high percentage that someone will go and check out the CEO on LinkedIn. So if they have a strategy where they are putting messages and stories into the world that have that unique perspective, more and more people are going to be endeared to them. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people, what's your go-to? When I'm going to meet with somebody, I'm going to their LinkedIn profile to figure out who are they, what can I learn about them, what's what's a something I can talk about, right? Like what's a way to break the ice. And so if your profile is not dialed in, you're not creating content, you're missing opportunity for people to get to know a little bit about you as the leader, for sure. And there's so much to talk about. I mean, I love a good sports analogy and I love a good story about, life lessons from real world things. But we're talking about journeys today. Like, what's your journey? How did you get here? Did you envision being, in a leadership role from the time? Was that your goal when you were in school? Did you, what did it take to get here? What were lessons you learned along the way? What were mistakes that you made? What are the successes that you've seen? What would you do differently if you could have a do-over? Things like that. Like, it shows your philosophy as a leader. And I think people really want to see that. They want to have a connection with whomever they are working for and with.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I appreciate that you taking us through the start. You mentioned that it could start slow and then you build out these different content buckets. You're not being too elementary, but not too detail oriented. So once people do that, have you found a good way to document what's being put out? What are some of the systems that you utilize for documentation?
So a couple of things. Some people use a tool called Shield. I used to use Shield for a couple of years. It's a external tool where it can pull all of your content in. It basically, you can see it all in a dashboard, and it can be helpful to see that. But we get much better analytics on LinkedIn proper today than we used to. So I personally didn't feel like I needed to have that tool anymore. So utilizing the analytics that are in LinkedIn, you can see which content performed the best by 28, 90 days. That's very helpful. I like to, and I mentioned it at the top of the show, you can pull a download of everything that you have in LinkedIn. And one of the files you'll get is called shares. And that's literally everything you've ever posted ever. It's pretty cumbersome, but you can do find Control F in the Excel spreadsheet, search for certain keywords so that you can get a sense. I like to do that for content repurposing. I'll also sometimes put content in a Google Doc so that I can go back and find it based on certain topics. But, one good strategy is really I would say using the internal analytics. I'm not a big, I don't put too much weight and worry in how many views am I getting, this, that, and the other, because LinkedIn, it's the algorithm's constantly changing. We're always chasing it to figure out how do we leverage the algorithm. I'm kind of more in the philosophy of just keep swimming, just keep at it, keep going. The more you post, the more you build that goodwill, that good karma in LinkedIn. Don't get too caught up in the numbers. It's more of the success for me personally is when you're out and about and people are like, oh God, I see your stuff on LinkedIn all the time. Now that person may never have engaged with your content, but that tells me I'm being seen and people actually are paying attention to what I'm talking about. And I think that's always a win.
It's a huge win. How long do you think it takes for you to create LinkedIn content now? If you were to crank out a post right now, how long, just ballpark, would it take you to write that out?
Probably about, if I'm just doing a text post, maybe about 10 minutes. If I'm creating a graphic or something a little bit more complicated, like a video, for me, video is like a little bit of a heavy lift. That's going to be a little bit more time consuming, but like 10, 15 minutes, probably. I think if you overthink it, you should just put it away and come back later.
So here's why I ask, and here's what I want people to kind of look at the strategy behind this, because I think it's really important. So I did get to a point probably about a year into my LinkedIn journey where I said, if I'm going to spend, and that's about in line with what I do, right? About 10 minutes for writing. It could be between 10 and 20 for me when it comes to a writing post. But I said about a year in, if I'm going to spend, these 15 minutes to write this post, how can I get residual results off them? And then there are different instances that it would be appropriate to post. You had mentioned, repurposing content on a regular basis. So as an example, and I want people to kind of recognize this example and why it's so important and how people could utilize this. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking in Connecticut, and I was literally driving by Mark Twain's house. And I've always respected Mark Twain as a writer. So I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to check out Mark Twain's house and the museum. So I went and I got a picture of me with Mark Twain's house in the background, and I wrote a post on what I learned from touring Mark Twain's house. So I spent time doing that. I posted it. I got a ton of engagement. It got a bunch of messages. It was really good for me to post. But now I have something that I could post every year on Mark Twain's birthday. So I literally went back into my documentation. I found when was Mark Twain born, and I put it in that spot on that day, that every day on Mark Twain's birthday, I'm going to post what I did a couple weeks ago. And every year I could post this. I'm going to tweak some of the verbiage, but I'm going to get residual results based on that. So I want people to start looking at this from a strategy perspective, because what Rachel mentioned, when she's out and about and people say, hey, I saw your stuff on LinkedIn. Imagine how this can supercharge your sales pipeline process, where you could literally take people from going cold to actually warm leads based on the content that you're sharing. So can you take us through how people could really utilize the documentation strategy as well as how it could supercharge their sales process?
Yeah, I think your point of like, you'd have this post and now you can use it every year at a certain time, right? So you can do, it can be as simple as in your calendar on whatever day that is, you literally have the link to that, the URL to that LinkedIn post as a task, write Mark Twain post. Here's the link. And then you can just use that as your reminder that every year on his birthday or whatever, you're going to share that same piece of content. So it can be as simple as using, again, your calendar, creating a spreadsheet with links. Every LinkedIn post has a unique URL. You can grab that URL and just pop it into a document based on what you want to be talking about. So the example I like to share is every couple of months, I share a post that talks about how do you download your LinkedIn connections, because it's a great tool. It's a good exercise to do. And I've posted it probably 4 times. I've also used it as an email lead story for my list 2 or 3 times. Every single time I share it, I get people that go, you can do that? I had no idea you could do that. So your audience is constantly growing. And your content, especially evergreen content. So like thinking about when it comes to sales, what are the questions your customers are always asking? That is content that you should be sharing on a regular basis. And I promise you that if you share a common question with a great post that talks about, customer blah, blah, blah question, this is something that lots of people are wondering about. How do you solve XYZ? Tell a story with a call to action. You share that in January, and then you share that again in June. No one's going to remember that you shared that in January. Nobody. You're helping yourself by repurposing content that is evergreen and is going to help continuously show your expertise and the solutions that you have for the problems that your target audience needs solved.
And it's amazing how many people are afraid to post something again. But based on your point, it's amazing how there is a vast majority of our audience that might not see it, even ones that are paying close attention. So let me give two examples, because I think this really speaks to what you said, Rachel. So you mentioned you post something regarding downloading contacts. I've never seen that post from you. And I pay a lot more attention to your content than someone else's, and I've never seen it. Now, I might have been in a meeting. Maybe I was at a certain event, and when it would have come up in on my feed, it was there and then gone. So the next time you post that and I see it, that's going to be new for me. And also another example too is I remember in one of the conversations that we had, one of the episodes, I mentioned a story that's in my content bank right now about I was traveling to an event. My son's in the back seat. I was going to drop him off at school and he projectile vomited all over me. I was so angry. I ended up calling the event planner saying, hey, like, I'm not going to make it right now. And what that did with our business relationship, the person was super understanding. It made me more human. And now I have an even better relationship. And I remember sharing that story with you and how many times I posted it. And I remember in that episode, you said you had never seen it. And I think since then you saw the last time I posted it, but I want people to recognize that even with someone like Rachel and myself, that we're paying more attention to each other's content, there's stuff that we're missing. So if you're ever afraid to post something again, don't be, because more than likely there is potential clients that are out there that you could reach that you would have missed by holding back on that. So I really appreciate you mentioning that.
Yeah. First of all, I love that story because it's hilarious, and every parent definitely can relate to some getting vomited on by their child at some point in their life. But I think the reason why people are so hesitant to repurpose content like that is unfortunately because some people do a bad job of it, and we see that content where every post is kind of cookie cutter with a pretty heavy sales pitch, or sign up for my email list, buy my course. I don't know, no dig on doing any of that stuff, but there are some people on LinkedIn that they are putting that same message out over and over and over and over again, and so then you don't care anymore. There's a big difference between something like that and cycling content every couple of months. And I would say, that the download your connections, I probably could post that every quarter. I'm more likely to post it twice a year. So 2 times a year. That no one will remember that. It's not like you get your list of LinkedIn memories of this is what happened on LinkedIn a year ago, like you do on Facebook, which are delightful, by the way. So, I think that don't worry about that. You're going to make your life easier to sustain a content strategy when you do identify can you identify 4 to 5 pieces of content that you can cycle through a couple of times a year. And, that might be a holiday greeting. The post I put up for Thanksgiving and like the Christmas holidays and New Year's, I put the same post up every single year.
Don't tell anyone. Don't mention that on a podcast.
Don't tell anyone. But like, why change it? It doesn't, it serves a purpose, right? It's making my life easier to put the same graphic up with a similar post. So that's one example, because that's more calendar based on the time of year. But if there are certain days of the year where there is something significant based on the calendar, go back to that date and see how you can tweak that content. Like you said, for Mark Twain's birthday, I've seen you do it for MLK. When you're using content from when you've gone to Memphis or you've been in Atlanta at the MLK sites. That's just being smart, right? Work smarter, not harder. Like, same thing applies on LinkedIn.
It's a really good point. So speaking of working smarter, so something that I did a few months ago, and I was kind of testing it, I've tweaked it a little bit since then, that I found works really well for people that want to repurpose something, but they want to get a little bit different, a different group of people that might be posting than what they're normally used to. So several months ago, I was posting. I typically post around 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So my time, 8:30. That's the most engagement I get for me personally. So people need to figure out, what time works for them. But I remember, and I post real time. I don't use any automated software to post. I know there's a lot of people that say yay or nay with that. I literally post like I'm physically posting. And I remember, I kid you not, it was right around the time my back was hurting so bad. I had a back injury. I was in a lot of pain, and I was literally laying on the ground stretching. But it was around 8:30, so I'm like, I gotta go post on LinkedIn. And it was something that was recycled, okay, to use your verbiage, repurposed content. So I was copying and pasting it, and I was gonna post. And I'm laying on my back, and I'm stretching, and I copy and paste. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to put a PS at the end of this. So I forget exactly what the content was, but I had my post, and then I said, PS, currently laying on my back while I'm posting this. Have you ever dealt with back pain? If so, how did you overcome it? So now I have the main message. I have this PS that's at the end. There was a ton of comments with people. Hey, I went to PT. Hey, this chiropractor helped me. Hey, have you ever tried this stretching? Now, here's why that was important for me. Even though it didn't really have to do with the main post, all of those comments pushed that content out to more and more people. And it was a good testing ground for me where I was like, I wonder if I could do this again. So I've utilized that strategy since then, where I'll put a PS at the end of some of the ones that I'm repurposing just to change it just ever so slightly. And it's amazing that there's a new wave of people that will come and they'll post. So I'm curious to know, Rachel, are there any tweaks that you've done with your content that maybe people wouldn't really think of that have helped you when it comes to different tips?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we have so many content options on LinkedIn. And so you can take your original post and think about, well, how can I change this? Can I add a graphic? That's different. Maybe you just posted text the first time, and maybe this time you can add a graphic, or you can add a document, which is like the little thing that you click through, like the little mini PDF. You can basically take the topic and the wording and speak it into your phone as a video, right? So you can think about taking the same idea, but just change the format. So that's one super easy tweak. I love the PS idea. It's kind of fun and different. PS, I'm writing this on the plane to my next speaking gig in California, or wherever you're traveling off to. Something that just shifts it up a little bit. But I think, the easiest one is to think about, how can I change the content type, because we just get so many options when it comes to content. It's not like Instagram where you basically have a photo or video. That's it. We have a ton of different content options, and we should definitely play with the different tools that we have.
It's a really good point. And absolutely. Think of, when we were talking about that tree, right? How many different subcategories? Well, there's so many different categories you could have with content based on everything that you said. So we started by talking about the challenge, right? How tough it was and how slow it was for us to do this. Now let's talk about where we are today. So I want to talk about the reward. So what are some rewards that you've seen by utilizing LinkedIn as a platform?
Oh, goodness. Number one is just building relationships with great people. So this summer, I was on vacation in New York City with my family, and the stars aligned. A couple other people were in town at the same time. And thanks to relationships that have been built on LinkedIn, we all met up, about 15 of us, and we were able to actually meet at LinkedIn. We had a tour of the offices. We had lunch in the cafeteria. We took a billion photos. And the opportunity to meet people that I only know through LinkedIn. And when we met, it was like, we already know each other. We already have these relationships built. That is the value of this platform to me. Yes, new business is going to come eventually, but you have to build that relationship and build the trust with your audience. And you do that by having a clear brand through your profile, being connected to the right people, and then showing up consistently by sharing content and engaging with other people. That builds the relationship so that you can do all the other things that you want to do based off of that trust that you've built.
That's such a good point. And, I think it's funny to say, but it's how true is this? I've never read a business book that said networking is not important. Like networking
Right.
is so important. Like, could you imagine reading a business book that says no one should ever network? No way, because we know how important it is. And one of the things that this does for us is it literally makes our life easier when it comes to sales. Since I started, it was agonizing for me sales wise when I started with LinkedIn in 2019. Fast forward to today, it's so much easier for me to sell what I'm selling right now. Unbelievably easier from what it was. And why? Because again, I have those relationships. It's name ID. People recognize different stories that I'm putting out into the world. So when I get them on a call or when I'm in a meeting with them, they already feel that they know me. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe they don't know me well, but they know my stories. They've connected with the stories that I've shared. It has improved my business in ways that I never thought possible. And in addition, I do want to speak to something that we had talked about earlier. So when we launched the episode in April, and again, I'll include all this in the show notes, but that episode we did, refining your stories through LinkedIn, a lot of people don't utilize LinkedIn as a testing ground as well. So what I mean is we're in a time in human history that we can almost get immediate feedback. Okay. So what I mean is if you share a story on LinkedIn, and you get a bunch of comments and you get feedback, now you know that story is a really good story. You could add that into your sales pipeline process. If you have sales reps that go into different events, or maybe they're at different conferences or trade shows, now you know that you might want to focus in on a certain story that you shared on LinkedIn, something that got buzz, something that got engagement. I've literally become a better speaker based on my content on LinkedIn. I've added stories into my workshop based on stories that shared on LinkedIn well, that people were engaged with. People could do the exact same thing. So there's so much that we can gain from doing this. So I appreciate everything that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think to kind of compare why that is successful, building those relationships, taking the time. And I want to emphasize, and you've said it multiple times, but I think it bears repeating of this is not this is not a quick process. There is no easy button on LinkedIn. People will share oh, I posted for 30 days and I 10x'd my business. I don't personally believe that, because I think it is a long, slow sometimes painful, but ultimately rewarding process on LinkedIn. And that is where you see the success. And that's why we find it so frustrating, many of us, when we get pitched to death in the DMs by people who've never taken any time to get to know us and to engage with us. It's better use of time to go take, be the turtle, be the tortoise, take your time, build those relationships, go slow and steady versus just like message, and get people who just don't want to hear from you. And they end up blocking people because it's overwhelming and it's impersonal. And maybe you get one response out of 100 versus I'd rather get 5 potential customers who know me and want to work with me because I've built that trust over time. So be the tortoise, don't be the hare.
Sure. It is a journey, right? And thank you for outlining your journey with us. I really appreciate what you had mentioned, Rachel, and I got a lot out of this conversation, but there's 3 things in particular that I want everyone listening to really grab a hold of. I really appreciate you mentioning, how do you break down concepts? It's so important. How do you break down concepts? How do you establish those content buckets? I challenge everyone listening to think about the content buckets that they could utilize when it comes to LinkedIn. I also mentioned something that I appreciate something you mentioned regarding don't be too elementary, but don't be too detailed either. We need to add our unique perspective, but we need to be somewhere in the middle. I think that's really sound advice and really good wisdom. The third and final piece is I appreciate you mentioning the repurposing content, specifically internal analytics, as well as downloading the posts that people have actually shared into the world. You can actually download all that information. That gives us clues on how to repurpose and utilize content in the future. So I appreciate those 3 things. Those are going to be my 3 takeaways. If someone wants to get more information on you, on what you do, the services you provide, where's the best place they can go to get that information?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just hit me up with a connection request and you can just say Stories with Traction in the message and I'll know where you found me.
That's awesome. It would be terrible if you would have said something else, right? If you wouldn't have said on Instagram, find her on Threads. No.
Do not find me on Instagram.
I will put Rachel Simon's LinkedIn account in the show notes. People could just click and they can find you there. So thanks again, Rachel. I very much appreciate your time today.
Oh, always great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.